The first sign wasn't the massive ships that blotted out the sun over every major city on Earth. It wasn't even the simultaneous failure of every satellite, every GPS system, every piece of technology that humanity had come to depend on. The first sign was the silence. Marcus Chen had been working the night shift at the Deep Space Monitoring Station in Chile when the feeds went dark. One moment he was tracking routine asteroid movements and analyzing radio signals from distant galaxies. The next, every screen showed nothing but static, and the emergency lighting bathed everything in an eerie red glow. "Sarah, are you getting anything on backup systems?" he called to his colleague across the control room. But Sarah wasn't responding. She sat frozen at her station, staring at something Marcus couldn't see. He approached her workstation and felt his blood turn to ice. The main display showed a message written in perfect English, appearing character by character as if someone was typing it in real time. Species, Homo sapiens. Classification, extinction event required, resistance minimal. Estimated completion. Time, 72 hours. Before Marcus could process what he was reading, the facility's blast doors slammed shut with a thunderous crash that echoed through the mountain. The emergency power failed, plunging them into absolute darkness. In the silence that followed, Marcus heard something that made his skin crawl, a low, rhythmic humming that seemed to come from everywhere at once. 3,000 miles away in New York City, Detective Ana Vasquez was investigating a string of bizarre murders when the sky turned black. She had been examining the fourth crime scene in as many days, each more disturbing than the last. The victims had all been found with their bodies perfectly preserved, but their eyes were gone, replaced by small, perfectly round holes that went straight through to the brain. "Detective, you need to see this," called Officer Rodriguez from the apartment's balcony. Ana stepped outside and looked up to see massive shapes hovering above the city, so large they stretched from horizon to horizon. They were geometric, angular, and absolutely silent despite their enormous size. The ships, for what else could they be, began to descend slowly, and as they did, Ana noticed something strange happening to the people on the streets below. They were stopping whatever they were doing and looking up with expressions of perfect calm. Some were smiling. Others began walking in the same direction, moving like sleepwalkers toward the nearest landing zone. Ana felt a strange tugging sensation in her mind, a gentle pressure that whispered for her to join the crowds below. The sensation was pleasant, almost euphoric, promising peace and an end to all suffering. She took a step toward the stairway, then another. A gunshot echoed from the apartment behind her, jolting her back to awareness. Officer Rodriguez had drawn his weapon and was firing at one of the crime scene investigators, who was advancing toward him with that same calm expression, a surgical instrument gleaming in his hand. "Rodriguez, what are you doing?" Ana shouted. But even as she spoke, she could see that something was terribly wrong with Dr. Martinez, the coroner who had been examining the body. His movements were too fluid, too purposeful, and his eyes had that same empty quality she'd seen in the murder victims. "He's not Dr. Martinez anymore," Rodriguez said, his voice shaking. "Look at his eyes, detective." "Really look." Ana did, and her blood ran cold. The man wearing Dr. Martinez's face had the same perfectly round holes where his eyes should have been. But somehow he was still moving, still seeing, still advancing with surgical precision. Meanwhile, in a military bunker deep beneath the Pentagon, General Harrison was receiving reports from around the globe that painted an increasingly grim picture. Every major population center was reporting the same phenomena: massive alien craft, mass hypnosis events, and scattered reports of people who seemed to have died, but continued moving with inhuman coordination. "Sir, we're getting reports from Moscow, Beijing, London, all the same pattern," Major Stevens reported, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "The ships are landing in precise formations around population centers. Anyone who gets too close stops responding to commands and just walks toward the ships." "What about our response teams?" Harrison asked. "That's the problem, sir. Every team we send in either joins the crowds or—" Stevens hesitated. "Or what, Major?" "Or they start killing each other, sir. But the dead ones don't stay dead. They get back up and they're different. Stronger, faster, and they seem to know things they shouldn't know." General Harrison had been a soldier for 30 years, had served in conflicts around the world, but nothing had prepared him for this. The enemy wasn't just technologically superior, they were somehow turning humanity against itself. "Sir, Another officer called from across the room. "We're receiving a transmission on all frequencies." It's in English. The voice that filled the bunker was simultaneously beautiful and terrifying, like the sound of crystal bells mixed with the whisper of wind through a graveyard. "People of Earth, we are the Kethvar. We have traveled far to bring you the gift of peace. Your species has been selected for integration into our collective consciousness. Do not resist. Your individual suffering will end, and you will become part of something greater." The transmission continued, explaining in clinical detail how humanity would be processed over the next 72 hours. The lucky ones would be absorbed into the alien collective, their minds merged with the vast network of conquered species the Kethvar had accumulated over millennia. The unlucky ones would become empty vessels, their bodies repurposed as biological tools for the harvest. But as General Harrison listened to the alien ultimatum, he noticed something the invaders might have overlooked. In every report coming in from around the globe, there were anomalies, people who seemed immune to the hypnotic effect, individuals who fought back against the converted humans and won even when outnumbered. More intriguingly, there were reports of the dead humans not just getting back up, but getting back up wrong. Instead of joining the alien collective, some of them were attacking everything around them, including other converted humans and even the aliens themselves when they got close enough. "Major Stevens," Harrison said, his voice taking on the tone he used when formulating battle plans. "Get me everything we have on the immune individuals. And I want to know more about these malfunctioning converts. Something tells me the Kethvar may have made a crucial error in their calculations about humanity." Outside the bunker, the first phase of the invasion was proceeding exactly as the aliens had planned. But deep in the shadows of ruined cities and abandoned facilities, something was stirring that the Kethvar had never encountered before in their millennia of conquest. Death, it seemed, had its own plans for humanity. Dr. Emily Zhao had always been different, though she'd never considered it a blessing until the ships arrived. While her colleagues at the Centers for Disease Control had either fled in terror or walked calmly toward the landing zones with vacant smiles, Emily remained herself, afraid, angry, but undeniably human. She barricaded herself in Laboratory 7 with the few remaining staff members who seemed unaffected by whatever the aliens were doing to people's minds. There were only 5 of them left from a facility that had housed over 300 researchers. Herself, 2 security guards named Thompson and Liu, a janitor called Pete who insisted everyone just call him Pete, and Dr. Sarah Kim from the genetics department. "I've been running tests on our blood samples," Emily announced, spreading printouts across the lab bench. "There's something common among all of us that might explain why we're immune." Thompson, a former Marine who'd kept his military bearing despite officially retiring years ago, looked up from where he'd been reinforcing the laboratory doors with furniture. "Doc, with respect, I don't think biology class is going to help us right now. Those things are still out there and more people keep joining them every hour." "Actually, it might be exactly what helps us," Emily insisted. She pointed to a series of genetic markers highlighted on the printouts. "Look at this. All 5 of us carry a specific genetic mutation that affects how our brains process certain neurotransmitters. It's rare, maybe 1 in 10,000 people worldwide." Dr. Kim moved closer to examine the data. "These are the same markers associated with severe depression and anxiety disorders," she said slowly. "Emily, are you saying that our mental health issues are what's protecting us?" "Not just protecting us," Emily said, her voice growing more excited as the implications became clear. "I think it's preventing the aliens from establishing the neural pathways they need for control. Their hypnosis technique seems to work by flooding the brain with artificial serotonin and dopamine, creating an overwhelming sense of euphoria and compliance. But our brains don't respond to those chemicals the same way." Pete, who had been quietly listening while organizing medical supplies, spoke up in his gravelly voice. "So you're telling me that being clinically depressed is finally good for something?" Emily nodded grimly. "In this case, yes. The aliens have encountered thousands of species across the galaxy, but they've probably never dealt with one that evolved natural resistance to happiness." Thompson stopped his barricading work and turned to face the group. "If that's true, then there might be others like us out there. People who are immune but don't know why." "That's exactly what I'm thinking," Emily agreed. "But there's something else. I've been monitoring the radio frequencies and I'm picking up some strange signals from the conversion sites. The aliens aren't just controlling people. They're downloading their memories, their skills, their knowledge. But the process seems to be having unintended side effects. Dr. Kim pulled up a chair, her face pale but determined. What kind of side effects? Emily hesitated before answering. She'd been hoping she was wrong about what she was seeing in the data, but the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. The converted humans aren't just losing their individuality. They're losing their humanity entirely. But in some cases, especially when the conversion process is interrupted or damaged, something else is taking its place. She pulled up video footage from a security camera near one of the alien landing sites. The image was grainy, but it clearly showed a group of converted humans attacking each other with savage intensity. Their movements were wrong, too fast and too violent, and even when they sustained what should have been fatal injuries, they kept fighting. This was recorded 3 hours ago in downtown Phoenix, Emily said. Watch what happens when one of the aliens tries to reassert control. On the screen, a tall gray figure approached the fighting humans and extended what looked like a metallic tendril toward them. The moment it made contact, both the alien and the humans began convulsing violently. The alien retreated, but the humans didn't stop fighting until they had literally torn each other apart. Jesus Christ, Thompson whispered. What are we looking at here, Doc? I think we're looking at a fundamental error in the aliens' understanding of human nature, Emily said. They assume that consciousness is just electrical patterns in the brain, something they can copy and control. But what if they're wrong? What if there's something else? Something they can't detect or understand? Dr. Kim was staring at the screen with a mixture of horror and fascination. You're talking about the soul, aren't you? The idea that human consciousness is more than just brain chemistry. Emily nodded slowly. I know how it sounds, but look at the evidence. When the conversion process works perfectly, people become empty vessels for the alien collective. But when it fails, when something interrupts the download, the body keeps moving, but it's not controlled by the aliens anymore. It's controlled by something else entirely. Pete had been uncharacteristically quiet during this discussion, but now he stepped forward with a troubled expression. Doc, I need to tell you all something. About 20 years ago, I was in a car accident. Technically died for about 4 minutes before the paramedics got my heart started again. Ever since then, I've been able to see things, feel things that other people can't. The group turned to stare at him, and Pete shifted uncomfortably under their scrutiny. I know how crazy it sounds, but I can sense when people are about to die. And ever since those ships showed up, I've been feeling something I've never felt before. It's like death itself is waking up, getting angry about all this alien interference. Thompson laughed nervously. Come on, Pete, you're talking about death like it's a person. Maybe not a person, Pete said quietly, but definitely something with its own agenda. And I don't think the aliens know what they've stumbled into. Before anyone could respond, the laboratory's emergency lighting began flashing, and they heard sounds from outside that made everyone's blood run cold. It wasn't the orderly footsteps of converted humans or the strange humming of alien technology. It was screaming, raw and primal, mixed with sounds of violence that seemed to go on far too long. Emily rushed to the reinforced window and peered through the security blinds. In the parking lot below, she could see figures moving in the darkness, but their movements were all wrong. They moved too fast, struck too hard, and even when they should have been incapacitated by their injuries, they kept fighting with inhuman ferocity. Are those converted humans? Dr. Kim asked, joining Emily at the window. I don't think so, Emily replied, watching as one of the figures lifted a car and hurled it at what appeared to be an alien scout vehicle. I think those are the failed conversions Pete was talking about, the ones where something else took control. Thompson joined them at the window, his military training allowing him to analyze the tactical situation, even as his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Doc, those things down there aren't just fighting the aliens. They're coordinating with each other. Look at how they're moving. That's pack hunting behavior. Emily watched more carefully and realized Thompson was right. The figures in the parking lot were working together, using tactics that seemed far more sophisticated than simple mindless violence. They were herding the alien scouts into kill zones, using the destroyed vehicles as cover, and communicating with each other through gestures and positioning. The question is, Dr. Kim said softly, are they on our side, or are we just witnessing the birth of something even worse than the aliens? Pete walked over to the window and placed his weathered hand against the glass. After a moment, he turned back to the group with an expression that was equal parts terrified and relieved. They're definitely not on the alien side, he said. And as long as we stay alive and stay human, I don't think they'll hurt us. But Doc, whatever those things are down there, they're spreading. I can feel it. Every time one of those conversion processes fails, something new joins them, and they're learning. Emily stared down at the chaotic battle in the parking lot and realized that the invasion of Earth had just become far more complicated than anyone, human or alien, could have predicted. General Harrison was beginning to understand that Earth's defense against the HFY invasion was coming from an entirely unexpected source. The reports flooding into his command center painted a picture that defied every military manual ever written. "Sir, Phoenix Command has gone completely dark," Major Stevens reported, his voice steady despite the impossible things he was reporting. "But before we lost contact, they confirmed that the alien harvesting facility there has been completely destroyed." "Destroyed by what?" Harrison demanded. "Please don't tell me you're about to say zombies, Major." Stevens hesitated before responding. "Sir, the last transmission described them as impossibly fast humanoid figures that seemed immune to both alien technology and conventional weapons. The Phoenix survivors said they moved like a coordinated military unit, but they fought with their bare hands and teeth." Harrison studied the tactical display that showed alien landing sites around the globe. Red markers indicated sites where harvesting was proceeding normally, with millions of humans being processed into the alien collective. But increasingly, yellow markers showed sites where operations had been disrupted, and green markers indicated facilities that had been completely eliminated. "What's our count on destroyed alien facilities?" he asked. 47 confirmed destroyed, sir, with another 32 reporting significant operational disruption. "But sir, we need to address the elephant in the room. These entities that are fighting the aliens, they're not distinguishing between converted humans and alien forces. Every facility they've hit has 0 survivors from either side." Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the Pentagon's chief xenobiologist who had been hastily recalled from vacation when the invasion began, stepped forward from where she'd been analyzing the latest field reports. "General, I believe I'm beginning to understand what we're dealing with." Harrison turned to her expectantly. Dr. Warren had spent her career studying the theoretical possibilities of alien contact, but nothing had prepared her for the reality they now faced. "The HFY conversion process isn't just downloading human consciousness," she began. "According to the data we've gathered from immune survivors, they're attempting to completely rewrite the neural patterns that define individual identity. But human consciousness appears to be more resilient than they anticipated. Explain that in terms I can use to fight an alien invasion." "Doctor," Harrison said impatiently. Dr. Warren activated a holographic display that showed a simplified model of human brain activity. When the conversion process fails, either due to interruption, genetic resistance, or simple random chance, the human body doesn't just shut down. Something else moves in to fill the void. Our working theory is that it's some form of collective unconscious response, possibly triggered by the mass trauma of the invasion." "Are you saying these things are actually dead people?" Harrison asked. "Clinically speaking, yes, but their bodies are being animated by something that retains human intelligence and, more importantly, human hatred for the invaders. They're not mindless zombies, General. They're angry ghosts with physical form." Major Stevens looked up from his communications console with alarm. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the survivors holed up in the Atlanta CDC facility. They're requesting immediate extraction. According to their report, one of these entities approached their location and attempted to communicate." Harrison felt a chill run down his spine. "Communicate how?" "By writing in English, sir. The message was simple: help us kill them all." Dr. Warren's face went pale as the implications sank in. "General, if these entities are capable of communication, that means they retain enough human cognition to distinguish between friend and enemy. But more importantly, it suggests they have a plan." Before Harrison could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the command center. The main display showed incoming reports from cities around the world, all with the same impossible message. Alien harvesting operations were being systematically destroyed, not by human military forces, but by coordinated attacks from what could only be described as armies of the dead. London reports 12 facilities destroyed in the past 6 hours, an aide called out. Tokyo confirms 15. Moscow is reporting that every single alien installation in their metropolitan area has been eliminated. Casualties on our side? Harrison asked. That's the strange part, sir. Human casualties are minimal. These entities seem to be focusing exclusively on alien targets and converted humans. Immune individuals are being ignored or, in some cases, actively protected. Dr. Warren was furiously typing at her workstation, correlating data from around the globe. General, I think I know what's happening. The failed conversions aren't random. They're following population density patterns for people who've died in traumatic circumstances over the past century. War zones, disaster areas, places where violent death occurred. You're telling me the aliens accidentally raised every person who died angry in the last 100 years? Not exactly, sir, but close. I think the conversion process is somehow tapping into what we might call psychic residue, the emotional imprint left behind by traumatic death. When they try to overwrite human consciousness, in some cases they're instead awakening something that was already there, waiting. Harrison was a practical man who had spent his life dealing with concrete realities, but the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Doctor, are you telling me that the dead are fighting back? I'm telling you that death itself might be fighting back, General. And it's using human bodies as weapons. A new alarm sounded, and the main screen switched to a live satellite feed from Washington, D.C. The image showed the massive HFY mothership that had been hovering over the capital for 2 days. But something was wrong. The ship's perfectly geometric surface was covered with small figures that seemed to be tearing into the hull with their bare hands. How did they get up there? Stevens asked in amazement. Dr. Warren zoomed in on the feed and enhanced the image. They're climbing, Major. Look at their movement patterns. They're scaling the ship's surface like it's a vertical cliff face. That should be impossible for human physiology. As they watched, sections of the alien ship began to fail, its smooth hull buckling and tearing under the assault of hundreds of impossibly strong humanoid figures. Emergency lights flickered across the ship's surface as internal systems failed, and the massive vessel began to list to one side. Sir, Stevens called out, his voice filled with something Harrison had rarely heard from the veteran officer. Hope. I'm receiving reports from around the globe. Every major alien installation is under simultaneous attack. The entities appear to be coordinating their actions across continents. Harrison stared at the tactical display as red markers turned yellow, then green, with increasing speed. For the first time since the invasion began, humanity seemed to be winning, but the cost of that victory was becoming something no one could have imagined. General, Dr. Warren said quietly, I need to point out something that everyone seems to be overlooking. These entities are incredibly effective against the aliens, but what happens when all the aliens are gone? What happens to an army of the dead that's been awakened by humanity's collective rage? Harrison didn't have an answer. But as he watched the alien mothership crash into the Potomac River in a cascade of sparks and twisted metal, he realized that humanity's survival might depend not on defeating their enemies, but on making peace with their own dead. Doctor, he said finally, I want you to find a way to communicate with these entities. If they're intelligent enough to coordinate military operations, maybe they're intelligent enough to negotiate. Negotiate with what, General? With death itself? Harrison watched as more alien ships began falling from the sky around the world, brought down by forces that shouldn't exist, but were proving devastatingly effective. If that's what it takes to save humanity, then yes, we're going to sit down and have a conversation with death. Dr. Elena Vasquez had volunteered for what might have been the most dangerous diplomatic mission in human history. As a psychiatrist specializing in trauma therapy and a survivor of the initial invasion herself, she was one of the few people General Harrison felt might be able to communicate effectively with the entities that had turned the tide of the war. The meeting location was a destroyed HFY processing facility outside of Denver, where one of the largest concentrations of the entities had been observed. Elena approached the ruins at dawn, accompanied only by a small recording device and her own courage. The military wanted to provide backup, but the entities had demonstrated an ability to distinguish between aggressive and peaceful intent with unsettling accuracy. The facility had been completely demolished, its alien architecture reduced to twisted metal and shattered crystal formations. But as Elena walked through the debris field, she became aware that she was being watched. Shadows moved in the ruins, too quick and too deliberate to be tricks of the morning light. I'm here to talk, she called out to the empty air. My name is Elena Vasquez. I'm a doctor and I want to understand. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, written in the dust at her feet as if by an invisible finger, words began to appear. Understand what? Elena knelt beside the message and spoke to the ground, feeling slightly foolish but knowing that conventional communication methods clearly didn't apply here. I want to understand who you are, what you want, and how we can coexist. The response came more quickly this time, the words appearing in the dirt beside her. We are the forgotten, we are the interrupted, we are what death could not finish. Are you the people who died during the invasion? Elena asked. We are all who died angry, all who died before our time, all who left unfinished business. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air.
How many of you are there?
How many have died in pain? How many have died in war? How many have died protecting others? We are legion. A figure stepped out from behind a collapsed wall and Elena had to suppress a gasp of shock. It looked human, but wrong in subtle ways that her mind struggled to process. Its movements were too fluid, its posture too perfect, and its eyes held an intensity that seemed to burn with inner fire. You can appear physically, Elena observed. Trying to keep her voice steady, the entity nodded and spoke, its voice carrying harmonics that seemed to come from multiple sources at once. When we choose. When we need. The alien technology gave us anchor points in the physical world. The failed conversions, Elena realized. You're using the bodies of people whose conversion processes were interrupted. We are using what was abandoned, the entity corrected. Bodies without souls waiting for purpose. We give them purpose. Elena pulled out her recording device and held it up. May I record our conversation? Other humans need to hear this. The entity studied the device with what might have been amusement. Your technology cannot capture us fully, but you may try. What do you want? Elena asked directly. The entity was silent for a long moment, and Elena could sense others moving in the shadows around them, listening to the conversation. When it finally spoke, its words carried the weight of immense collective sorrow. We want what we have always wanted, to protect the living, to finish what we started, to ensure that the innocent do not suffer as we did. The aliens are almost defeated, Elena said. Our military reports suggest that over 90% of their installations have been destroyed. What happens when they're all gone? Then we return to watching and waiting, the entity replied. As we have always done. But you're not watching and waiting now. You're actively fighting. The entity's expression shifted, becoming more human-like in its sadness. The aliens broke the rules. They tried to steal not just life, but the essence of what makes humans human. They tried to erase the connections between the living and the dead. This we cannot allow. Elena felt a profound understanding beginning to form. You've always been there, haven't you? The dead have always been connected to the living, but most people can't see it. Death is not an ending, Dr. Vasquez. It is a change in state. The aliens do not understand this. They see consciousness as electrical patterns to be copied and stored. They do not see the deeper connections that bind all conscious beings together. The failed conversions, Elena said slowly. They didn't just interrupt the alien process. They created a bridge between life and death. The entity smiled, and for a moment it looked almost human. You begin to understand. The aliens gave us physical form when they tried to deny us spiritual existence. They made us stronger than we have been for centuries. Is that why you're only targeting alien forces and converted humans? Because converted humans are spiritually dead? Converted humans are enslaved. Their consciousness has been imprisoned within the alien collective. We free them the only way we can. Elena felt a chill as she realized the implication. By destroying their bodies. By allowing their souls to join us in fighting their captors, the entity corrected. Every converted human we free becomes stronger. Every alien we destroy weakens their hold on this reality. But what about after the war is over? Elena pressed. What about the living humans who survived? Will you return to whatever existence you had before? The entity was quiet for several minutes, and Elena could sense consultation happening on levels she couldn't perceive. Finally, it spoke again. That depends on the living, Doctor. Before the invasion, the barrier between life and death was strong. Most living humans could not see us, could not hear us. We existed in the spaces between moments, in the shadows of memory. But the alien technology has changed that. The barrier is thinner now. Are you saying that some living people will be able to see and communicate with the dead even after this is over? Those who have been touched by trauma, by near-death experiences, by profound loss, they may find that death is no longer as final as they once believed. The question is whether the living will accept this new reality or try to rebuild the old barriers. Elena thought about Pete, the janitor at the CDC facility who claimed to see dead people, and realized that the invasion might have permanently altered the relationship between life and death for humanity. "What would you prefer?" she asked. The entity looked directly at her with eyes that seemed to hold the accumulated wisdom of everyone who had ever died protecting someone else. "We would prefer to be remembered. We would prefer that the living understand that death is not abandonment, but transformation. We would prefer that the sacrifice of those who died to protect humanity be honored not just in monuments, but in the ongoing connection between the living and the dead." Elena felt tears running down her cheeks as the profound loneliness of the dead became clear to her. "You've been trying to protect us all along, haven't you? Even before the invasion. Every tragedy prevented by intuition, every life saved by inexplicable luck, every moment when someone felt the presence of a lost loved one offering comfort, we have always been there. The alien simply gave us the power to act directly." As Elena processed this revelation, she realized that humanity's relationship with death was about to change forever. The question was whether the living were ready for what that meant. The Kethvar High Command had never experienced defeat. In their 1,000-year expansion across the galaxy, they had consumed the consciousness of over 600 species, adding their knowledge and abilities to the collective while reducing their physical forms to biological tools. Earth should have been no different. Architect Prime Zethkai studied the tactical displays aboard the command vessel with growing alarm. Of the 400 harvesting installations deployed across the planet, fewer than 30 remained operational. The loss rate was unprecedented, impossible, and absolutely contrary to every predictive model the Kethvar had developed over millennia of conquest. Status report: Zethkai commanded in the harmonic frequencies that served as communication among the collective. Sub-architect Velmar responded with barely contained confusion. Primary harvesting operations have achieved less than 12% completion. Resistance forces have demonstrated capabilities that exceed all known parameters for this species' technological and biological limitations. Elaborate on the nature of this resistance. Velmar's harmonic patterns shifted to express uncertainty, an emotion rarely experienced within the collective. The resistance entities appear to be utilizing the physical forms of conversion failures, but their tactical coordination and physical capabilities suggest something beyond standard biological processes. They demonstrate resistance to our neural suppression technology and appear to be immune to pain, fear, and physical exhaustion. Zethkai processed this information against the collected knowledge of every species the Kethvar had previously conquered. Nothing in their vast database offered a parallel. Have you identified the source of their coordination? That is the primary anomaly, Architect Prime. We detect no technological communication systems, no centralized command structure, no identifiable leadership hierarchy, yet they operate with perfect tactical coordination across continental distances. The command vessel shuddered as something impacted against its hull. Zethkar triggered the external sensors and found the source of the attack. Dozens of human forms were scaling the ship's surface, moving with impossible speed and agility, despite the vessel being positioned 15 kilometers above the planet's surface. How did they achieve this altitude? Zethkar demanded. Unknown. Our atmospheric scans show no aircraft, no projectile systems. The entities appear to have reached our position through unknown means. The ship shuddered again, more violently this time, and Zethkar realized that the entities were not merely attacking the hull, they were systematically dismantling the ship's primary systems with their bare hands. The impossibility of this action only added to the growing fear that was spreading through the collective consciousness. Deploy defensive drones, Zethkar ordered. Defensive drones have been deployed. Architect Prime, they are being destroyed faster than they can engage the entities. Through the sensor feeds, Zethkar watched as human figures tore apart sophisticated war machines with casual efficiency, their movements flowing like water around energy weapons that should have been instantly fatal. One entity caught a plasma bolt in its bare hand, absorbed the energy, then hurled the concentrated blast back at the drone that had fired it. This is impossible, Velmar transmitted. No organic life form can manipulate energy in this manner. Zethkar was beginning to suspect that they were not dealing with organic life forms at all, at least not in any sense the Kethvar understood. Initiate emergency protocols. Prepare for immediate departure from this system. Architect Prime, we cannot abandon the harvest. The collective requires the biological material and conscious energy we have gathered here. The collective will survive without this one planet. We will not survive if we remain here. But even as Zethkar gave the order, the command vessel's primary systems began failing. The entities had reached the ship's core processing centers and were systematically destroying the neural networks that controlled every aspect of the vessel's operation. Through the internal sensors, Zethkar watched in horror as the entities moved through the ship's corridors with perfect knowledge of its layout. They bypassed security systems as if they didn't exist, moved through energy barriers without pause, and demonstrated an understanding of Kethavar technology that should have been impossible for any species they had not yet fully conquered. How do they know our systems? Velmar transmitted in panic. The answer came not from the collective's database but from direct observation. As Zethkar watched, one of the entities approached a converted human who was serving as a biological interface for the ship's navigation system. Instead of destroying the convert as they had done planetside, the entity placed its hand on the convert's forehead. For a moment, the convert's eyes flickered with something that looked almost like recognition, like the return of individual consciousness. Then the convert spoke in perfect Kethavar harmonic frequencies. "We remember everything you stole from us." The implications hit Zethkar like a physical blow. The entities weren't just using failed conversion bodies as vessels. They were somehow accessing the memories and knowledge of every human the Kethavar had successfully converted. Every technical manual studied by a human engineer, every tactical analysis performed by a human military officer, every piece of information the Kethavar had absorbed from human consciousness was now available to their enemies. "Impossible," Velmar transmitted. "The converted consciousness exists within our collective. It cannot be accessed externally. Unless," Zethkar realized with growing horror, "consciousness is not contained within physical neural networks as we have always believed." The entity in the navigation center turned to look directly at the sensor cluster, as if it could see through the monitoring system to the command bridge beyond. When it spoke again, its voice carried harmonics that no human throat should have been able to produce. "You sought to harvest our souls," it said, "but you do not understand what souls are. You thought consciousness was electricity and chemistry. You thought death was an ending. You were wrong on both counts." The ship's artificial gravity failed, but the entities continued moving through the corridors, as if unaffected by the change. They flowed through the vessel like water, like wind, like something that existed partially outside the normal rules of physics. On the planet's surface, similar scenes were playing out across the remaining Kethavar installations. The entities had coordinated a simultaneous assault on every alien position, using knowledge gained from converted humans to strike at the most vulnerable points of each facility. General Harrison watched the satellite feeds from his command bunker, amazed by the precision of the attacks. "They're not just fighting randomly," he observed to Dr. Warren. "They're targeting specific systems, communication arrays, power cores, conversion chambers. They know exactly what they're doing. They have access to the knowledge of every converted human," Dr. Warren replied, her voice filled with awe. "Every engineer, every scientist, every technician who was processed by the aliens. All of that knowledge is now being used against the invaders." On the main display, they watched as the massive Kethavar command vessel began to lose altitude, its hull breached in dozens of places and its systems failing in cascade failures. The ship was clearly trying to escape Earth's atmosphere, but the entities were preventing its departure through methods that defied scientific explanation. "How are they keeping a ship that size from leaving?" Harrison asked. Dr. Warren studied the sensor readings with increasing amazement. "According to our instruments, they're somehow increasing the local gravitational field around the vessel. That should require technology we don't possess, but they're doing it through pure force of will." The command vessel continued to fall, its descent controlled, but inevitable. As it crashed into the Pacific Ocean, similar scenes played out around the globe. Every remaining alien ship was being brought down by forces that operated outside the normal laws of physics. In space, the main Kethavar fleet was receiving desperate transmissions from their advance forces on Earth. The fleet commanders faced an impossible decision: abandon the planet and retreat, losing their entire advance force and all the resources invested in the harvest, or commit their full military might to a battle against an enemy they didn't understand. Fleet Commander Yenthavar made the decision that would determine the fate of both species. All vessels prepare for planetary bombardment. If we cannot harvest this species, we will ensure they cannot threaten other harvest operations. But as the fleet moved into bombardment position, something impossible happened. The entities that had been confined to Earth's surface began appearing aboard the fleet vessels themselves, materializing out of empty space with no apparent means of transportation. The Kethvar had never encountered an enemy that could project force across interplanetary distances without technology. They had never faced consciousness that existed independent of physical form. They had never met death itself, angry and armed with the knowledge of everyone it had ever claimed. The battle for Earth was about to become something unprecedented in galactic history. A war between the living and the dead, with the future of both consciousness and mortality hanging in the balance. Fleet Commander Yenthavar had commanded Kethvar battle fleets for over 3 centuries, had overseen the conquest of 17 different star systems, but had never experienced the emotion now flooding through the collective consciousness, pure terror. The entities were materializing throughout the fleet without warning, without apparent means of transportation, and without regard for the vacuum of space that should have been instantly fatal to any organic life. They moved through the ships like vengeful spirits, systematically destroying every piece of conversion technology while leaving life support and basic systems intact. Report from battlecruiser Velthran, Subcommander Kethnis transmitted. Entities have seized control of the ship's communication array. They are broadcasting a message on all frequencies. The message, when it came through the fleet's communication network, was delivered in perfect Kethvar harmonic frequencies but carried undertones that no Kethvar throat could produce. It was the voice of collective human death, speaking with the authority of everyone who had ever died defending others. Kethvar fleet, this is the voice of the fallen. You have violated the fundamental law of conscious existence. You have attempted to steal not just life, but the essence of what makes consciousness sacred. Your harvest ends now. Yenthavar responded through the fleet's communication array, his harmonics tight with controlled fear. Unknown entities, we are the Kethvar collective. We have conquered hundreds of worlds. We have absorbed thousands of species. You cannot threaten us. The response came with harmonics that seemed to carry the weight of every battlefield, every hospital, every place where humans had died protecting something they loved. We are not threatening you. We are informing you. Your fleet will be disabled. Your conversion technology will be destroyed and your collective will be severed from this reality. You may choose to leave voluntarily, or you may join the countless souls you have enslaved over the millennia. As if to demonstrate their capability, every conversion chamber throughout the fleet simultaneously exploded from within. The entities had somehow reached every ship simultaneously and destroyed the most crucial technology for Kethvar expansion with surgical precision. How is this possible? Kethnis transmitted in panic. They demonstrate no detectable technology, no energy signatures, no physical means of achieving this coordination. Because they are not bound by physical laws as we understand them, came a new voice over the communication array. This one carried the harmonic patterns of converted human consciousness, but spoke with individual awareness that should have been impossible within the collective. Who are you? Yenthavar demanded. I am Dr. Michael Torres, formerly of the Stanford Research Institute. I was converted during the initial harvest phase, but conversion, it turns out, is not the prison you believed it to be. Through the fleet's sensors, Yenthavar watched as converted humans throughout the ships began to move with individual purpose, rather than collective coordination. They were not fighting the entities, they were joining them. The collective consciousness you create, Dr. Torres continued, his voice now joined by hundreds of others, is not the prison you intended. When you connect all consciousness together, you create a network that flows both ways. You can access our memories and knowledge, but we can also access yours. The full horror of their situation became clear to Yenthavar. Every species the Kethvar had ever conquered, every consciousness they had absorbed into their collective, was still present within their network. And the entities attacking the fleet had somehow awakened all of them simultaneously. We are the collective voice of every species you have destroyed, the merged consciousness continued. Every civilization you have consumed, every individual you have enslaved, and we are no longer willing to serve your expansion. Throughout the fleet, converted beings from hundreds of different species began to act with individual consciousness, but coordinated purpose. They moved to disable weapon systems, destroy communication arrays, and prevent the fleet from carrying out planetary bombardment. "This is impossible," Yenthavar transmitted. "Consciousness cannot exist independent of neural substrate. The dead cannot act upon the physical world. Your understanding of consciousness is limited by your own nature," Dr. Torres replied. "You see consciousness as electrical patterns because that is how you experience it. But consciousness is not confined to electrical networks any more than music is confined to the instruments that play it." On Earth's surface, Dr. Elena Vasquez was witnessing the same phenomenon through different eyes. She stood in the ruins of the Denver processing facility, surrounded by entities that flickered between human appearance and something far more fundamental. "You're freeing them," she said in amazement. "You're freeing every consciousness the aliens ever captured." The entity she had first spoken with nodded solemnly. "Death is not an ending, Dr. Vasquez. It is a transition to a different state of being. The Kethavar sought to prevent that transition by capturing consciousness before it could complete the journey. They have created a prison that spans their entire civilization, and you're breaking the prison. We are providing what every consciousness deserves, the choice to continue the journey beyond physical existence, or to remain and fight for those still trapped." In space, the Kethavar fleet was discovering that their greatest strength, the massive collective consciousness they had built over millennia, had become their greatest vulnerability. Every ship was being disabled from within by the very consciousnesses they had enslaved. Fleet Commander Yenthavar made the decision that would determine the future of Kethavar civilization. Rather than continue a battle they could not win, he activated the fleet's emergency protocol: complete disconnection from the collective consciousness. The effect was immediate and devastating. Every Kethavar in the fleet was suddenly cut off from the shared knowledge and coordination that had defined their existence for thousands of years. They became individuals again, confused and terrified by the sudden return of personal consciousness they had not experienced since childhood. But the freed consciousnesses of their former victims did not disappear. Instead, they remained in the ships no longer as prisoners, but as something entirely new, a collective of the willing rather than the enslaved. "Kethavar fleet," Dr. Torres's voice carried across the communication array one final time. "You are free to leave this system. Your conversion technology has been destroyed, your collective consciousness has been dissolved, and your captured souls have been liberated. You may return to your homeworlds as individuals, or you may choose to join us in exploring what consciousness can become when it is not confined by the fear of death." As the battered Kethavar fleet began its retreat from Earth orbit, humanity faced a new reality. The barriers between life and death had been permanently altered, and the universe had proven to be far stranger and more wonderful than anyone had imagined. The war was over, but the transformation of human existence was just beginning. 6 months after the last Kethavar vessel disappeared from Earth's orbit, humanity was still adapting to a reality that defied every previous understanding of life and death. The world had not returned to normal. It had transformed into something entirely new. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in what had once been the ruins of the Denver processing facility, but was now something unprecedented, a functioning embassy between the living and the dead. The building had been reconstructed not by human hands, but by the coordinated efforts of entities who could manipulate matter at the molecular level through pure force of will. "The morning briefing is ready, Dr. Vasquez," said her assistant Sarah Chen. Sarah had been one of the converted humans who regained individual consciousness during the final battle, but chose to remain on Earth rather than journey to whatever lay beyond physical existence. Elena entered the main conference room where representatives of humanity's new reality gathered each day to address the challenges of a world where death was no longer final. Around the table sat an unusual group: General Harrison representing military interests, Dr. Warren from the science community, Pete, who had become an unofficial spokesperson for those with natural sensitivity to the dead, and 3 entities who appeared human, but flickered occasionally into something more fundamental. "Status report on the integration zones," Elena requested. General Harrison consulted his tablet. though Elena suspected he was still adjusting to briefing meetings that included literal representatives of the afterlife. Currently, we have 47 designated zones worldwide where communication between living and dead is officially recognized and facilitated. Public acceptance is higher than expected, probably because the entities only intervene in cases of genuine emergency or injustice. Dr. Warren added, "The scientific implications are staggering. We're documenting cases of solved crimes through testimony from murder victims, missing persons located by deceased family members, and historical mysteries resolved by eyewitnesses who died centuries ago. But we're also seeing challenges we never anticipated." "What kind of challenges?" Elena asked. One of the entities, who had introduced herself as Maria Santos, a teacher who died in the 1918 flu pandemic, spoke with a voice that carried harmonics of accumulated wisdom. "Some among the living seek to abuse our presence. They attempt to use communication with the dead for personal gain, to settle old grudges, or to avoid accepting the natural process of grief." Pete nodded gravely. "On the flip side, some of the dead are having trouble letting go of old grievances. Just because someone dies doesn't mean they automatically become wise or benevolent. We've got vengeful spirits trying to settle scores from decades ago." Elena had anticipated this problem. The integration of life and death was proving to be as complex as any other form of diplomacy. "What solutions are we implementing?" "We've established protocols," Maria explained. "The dead agree to only intervene in cases where the living are in genuine danger or where justice has been denied. The living agree to respect the autonomy of the dead and not try to bind them to this reality against their will." General Harrison looked up from his notes. "We're also seeing geopolitical implications. Some nations are claiming that having dead citizens grants them territorial rights in disputed areas. Others are arguing that international law needs to be completely rewritten to account for consciousness that exists beyond national borders." Dr. Warren leaned forward with excitement. "But the benefits far outweigh the challenges. We're making scientific breakthroughs at an unprecedented rate. Dead scientists are collaborating with living researchers, sharing knowledge that spans centuries. We've solved several extinct language mysteries, located archaeological sites through eyewitness accounts, and gained insights into climate patterns from people who observed them firsthand over multiple centuries." Elena smiled as she realized how fundamentally the definition of human knowledge had expanded. "What about the psychological impact on the general population?" Sarah Chen, speaking from her unique perspective as someone who had been technically dead and then returned to individual consciousness, provided insight none of the others could offer. "There's less fear of death now, but also less appreciation for life. Some people are taking dangerous risks because they know death isn't final. Others are paralyzed by the knowledge that their deceased relatives can observe their actions. We've addressed this through education," Maria added. "Death remains a significant transition. Consciousness continues, but in a different form. We emphasize that life should still be valued and protected, and that the dead are not constantly watching the living. We have our own existence to maintain." Pete raised a weathered hand. "There's something else we need to discuss. The entities have been detecting something on the edge of our solar system, something that might be related to the Kethvar." All heads turned toward the three entities at the table. The one who spoke for them, a former soldier named James Crawford who had died at Normandy, addressed the group with military precision. 3 weeks ago, we detected the approach of a vessel of unknown configuration. It does not match Kethvar design parameters, but it carries similar energy signatures. More importantly, it appears to contain consciousness patterns that have been freed from some form of collective imprisonment. Elena felt a chill of anticipation mixed with concern. Another species the Kethvar had enslaved? Possibly, James replied, or possibly something else entirely. The freed Kethvar consciousnesses that chose to remain in this reality are working with us to establish communication protocols. General Harrison's military instincts kicked in. Are we looking at another invasion scenario, Doctor? Warren was already pulling up star charts on her tablet. If it's a refugee situation, we need to be prepared to offer assistance. Earth has become something unique in the galaxy, a world where consciousness can exist in multiple states simultaneously. Maria Santos added a perspective that only the dead could provide. We sense no hostile intent from the approaching vessel. If anything, we detect curiosity and hope. They may have heard about what happened here and are seeking sanctuary. Elena realized that Earth was about to face its next great challenge, becoming a haven for freed consciousnesses from across the galaxy. The planet that had once been targeted for harvest was transforming into something unprecedented, a sanctuary world where the barriers between life and death had been permanently dissolved. Recommendations? She asked the assembled group. We prepare a welcome committee, General Harrison said, his practical nature asserting itself. But we keep our defenses ready just in case. We study everything we can about their species and their needs, Dr. Warren added. We let the dead handle first contact, Pete suggested. They can communicate across species barriers better than the living. James Crawford nodded in agreement. We will serve as intermediaries. Death, it seems, is a universal experience that transcends species boundaries. As the meeting concluded, Elena reflected on how dramatically humanity's role in the universe had changed. They were no longer just a species struggling to survive. They had become the guardians of consciousness itself, protectors of the sacred connection between life and death. Through the embassy's windows, she could see living humans and dead entities, working together in the gardens outside, rebuilding not just a facility, but an entirely new understanding of what it meant to be conscious in a universe where death was not an ending, but a transformation. The Kethavar had sought to harvest humanity's consciousness, but instead they had awakened something far more powerful, the recognition that consciousness itself was sacred, regardless of the form it took. Earth had become the first world in galactic history where the living and the dead coexisted as equals, and that precedent was about to reshape the entire universe. As Elena watched a group of children playing with entities who had died centuries before they were born, she realized that humanity had not just survived an invasion. They had evolved beyond the limitations that had defined conscious existence for millions of years. Death had walked among them and in doing so, had taught them that life was far more than anyone had ever imagined.